Haiyan hits Vietnam and China's Guangxi region. Lam Woon Kwong says his review suggestion not meant to target CE's decision, and the government looks at ways to increase supply of commercial space.
Good evening. After one of the worst storms on record ravaged the Philippines, victims are just beginning to comprehend the devastation left behind. 250 people are confirmed dead, but officials expect the final death toll from Super Typhoon Haiyan could be more than 10,000. The storm has triggered a massive international aid effort, but as James Aiken reports, the damage is so bad that emergency workers are struggling to reach the hardest hit communities.
The once-in-a-lifetime storm has stunned a nation, and now the Philippines is beginning to grasp the epic proportions of devastation. Tacloban, the capital of Leyte province, was annihilated. Dazed survivors beg for help and scavenge for anything to get them through the next few hours. People who had little to begin with now have nothing. Student Erica Caricott is one of the millions impacted. We need food, she says, as she tries to tell her mom she is still alive. Amid the chaos, a mother gives birth with no prospects of medical care soon. As desperation gives way to misery, the government's emergency response measures are buckling under the pressure. Several countries and aid organizations are now mobilizing tens of millions of dollars worth of relief packages.
It's a whole government approach. The embassy has asked for not just military, but USAID is here, international relief organizations are here. Obviously, the military has logistics capabilities that are unique.
But on the front lines, aid is barely trickling in. Emergency workers have limited access to the hardest hit areas due to the miles of twisted wreckage and washed out roads.
Our problem is getting more relief goods in because the roads are not yet accessible. Even the day after the storm, we were retrieving bodies at the same time clearing roads. And the problem is 90% to 95% of people in City Hall are also casualties.
Officials can only guess at the final death toll, but they say the number of confirmed deaths will climb as communication is reestablished and emergency workers eventually reach areas cut off by the storm. James Aiken, TVB News.
By the time Super Typhoon Haiyan made landfall in Vietnam early today, it was downgraded significantly. The storm then swept into China's Guangxi region. Despite its weakened strength, Haiyan is still responsible for the deaths of 6 people in Vietnam and at least 4 in China.
Haiyan pushed its way into Vietnam's northeastern province, Quang Ninh, at about 5 a.m. today. Even though its peak wind speed was a weakened 135 kilometers per hour, Haiyan unleashed 300 millimeters of rain. The government had taken every precaution to ensure safety by evacuating 600,000 people in the most vulnerable areas. It also mobilized its army forces, 12 planes, 356 ships, and more than 1,000 trucks to transport emergency supplies. Haiyan had weakened to a Category 1 typhoon, packing winds of up to 155 kilometers per hour when it hit Do Son, the beach resort town of Haiphong City. For safety's sake, schools were closed and more than 60 flights were canceled. Still, 6 people died in storm-related incidents, mostly caused by collapsing homes or fallen trees. A journalist was also reported killed on the way to an interview. Footage from Haiphong, one of Vietnam's main port cities, showed uprooted trees, damaged building fronts, and rough seas. Despite its weakening force, Haiyan packed 118 km/h winds and dumped torrential rain on China's southern and southwestern regions. It also killed at least 4 people. The center of the storm reached Ninh Minh County in Guangxi at 9 a.m. today. In the coastal waters near Sanya in Hainan province, rescuers evacuated 12 crew members from 2 ships that lost control of their anchors. It took an hour and a half to rescue both crews whose vessels were about to crash into a nearby dam.
Executive Council convener Lam Woon Kwong said yesterday the chief executive should conduct an in-depth review of the free-to-air TV licensing issue. Today, Lam tried to clarify his comments by saying they were not meant to target the chief executive's personal decisions in the license issuing controversy. Evelina Leung reports.
Executive Council convener Lam Woon Kwong attempted to put out a fire he started yesterday when he called on the chief executive to conduct an in-depth review of the free-to-air TV license controversy. Lam stressed during a phone interview with TVB today that he was not criticizing the chief executive, nor was he asking IXCO to reconsider its decision. He said he simply wants the administration to thoroughly review the whole license issuing process. The goal is to see if there is any inadequacy in handling public expectations and whether they have given enough thought to every aspect of the issue.
Chief
Executive Leung Chun-ying today repeated that the whole licensing process complied with the law and the established mechanism. He said Lam had called for a review of the decision-making process and not the final decision made by IXCO.
The chief executive added whether or not the decision-making process relating to the granting of new TV licenses needs to be revised, this is a matter that should be looked into in the future.
However, critics were not happy with the explanations given by Lam and the CE. The Democratic Party's Albert Ho believes Lam's earlier comment showed there was no consensus within IXCO on its decision not to grant Hong Kong Television Network a license.
So I think up to now it shows that the decision is disastrous. It made Hong Kong people extremely furious. It shows that the present regime is totally ineffective and is totally failed to take heed of public expectations. So instead of what some people said, that Mr. W.K. Lam should resign, I think there should be collective responsibility that the IXCO should resign.
Other lawmakers, meanwhile, didn't agree with Ho. They said IXCO simply has to avoid making such controversial decisions again. Evelina Leung, TVB News.
The chief executive says his administration is looking at ways to increase the amount of commercial space available in Hong Kong. Some of the proposals include turning government buildings into offices. Evelina Leung tells us more.
Not only is there a shortage of residential units, the supply of commercial space is also shrinking. According to Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying, rents on commercial properties have surged 30% in the last 3 years, while the number of spaces available has dropped to a 5-year low. Speaking at a forum today, the CE talked about ways his administration would solve the problem. One short-term idea is to adjust the residential to commercial land ratio in development projects. This has already been done for the Kai Tak development project. The residential to commercial land ratio there now is about 20%. Other short to medium-term plans include developing Kowloon East. The chief executive said his administration is also considering turning government properties in core commercial districts into offices. These include the Trade and Industry Department office building in Mong Kok, car parks in Sheung Wan and Central, and 3 government office blocks along the Wan Chai harbourfront. Separately, the CE also said there were no more concerns about the government's plans for developing the Northeast New Territories. He hopes people understand the projects are in the interests of Hong Kong. Evelina Leung, TVB News.
World Court judges have ruled that Thailand must withdraw all its forces from the area around an ancient Hindu temple at its border with Cambodia. The verdict was delivered today by the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The 900-year-old Preah Vihear temple has been at the center of a long-running dispute between the two countries. In 1962, the same court ruled that the temple itself belonged to Cambodia, but it never clarified the boundaries around it. Armies from both countries have repeatedly clashed at the site. Both sides have promised to follow the court's ruling, but officials worry the verdict could increase tensions between the two countries and stoke nationalistic sentiment even further. Celebratory gunfire turned one birthday party in the U.S. state of Texas into a deadly nightmare. 2 high school students were shot dead and at least 22 others were injured. The incident happened around 11 o'clock Saturday night when nearly 100 young adults and teens were celebrating a birthday at a home in a Houston suburb. The initial investigation revealed that someone pulled a pistol and fired one celebratory shot into the air. Then someone else recklessly reacted by opening fire into the crowd. The gunfire continued outside as people ran in panic. Police are searching for 2 men in connection with that shooting.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in the Middle East to convince the region of the merits of a possible nuclear deal with Iran. He promised America was being very careful and wasn't abandoning its Arab allies, despite an apparent thaw in relations with Tehran. Tony Sabine reports.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is on a charm offensive in the Gulf, arriving in the United Arab Emirates overnight after talks in Geneva about Iran's nuclear program. Like its big neighbor, Saudi Arabia, the UAE is wary of any rapprochement with Tehran. So, Kerry's task will be to convince the Gulf state the US is being careful and isn't leaving its Arab allies in the lurch. Earlier today, Kerry said the major powers were unified on a deal during talks in Geneva, but the Iranians were unable to accept it. He seemed to support France for insisting on a tough line and denied reports major powers were in fact divided.
I'd say a number of nations, not just the French, but ourselves and others, wanted to make sure that we had the tough language necessary, the clarity in the language necessary, to be absolutely certain that we were doing the job and not granting more or doing something sloppily that could wind up with a mistake.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continued to make a case against rushing into a deal with Iran. He reminded the world that Israel could go it alone if threatened, and that only a tough line with Tehran would work.
I always said that the combination of crippling sanctions and a military option, that has the power to stop Iran. And
others seem to share Netanyahu's feelings, including a number of US lawmakers who want to tighten sanctions further, not relax them. In a related development, Iran agreed today that the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, would be allowed to increase monitoring at its atomic sites. Tony Sabine, TVB News.
Greece's coalition government has survived a no-confidence motion tabled by the main opposition party early today. The Prime Minister ended 3 days of debate by saying the debt-ridden country should be ready to borrow mainly from the financial markets towards the end of next year. The no-confidence motion filed by the opposition left-wing coalition fell well short of the 151 votes needed to pass. Several extreme right-wing groups also supported the motion. It was tabled last Thursday, a few hours after Greek riot police ended a nearly 5-month protest by workers laid off from a former state broadcaster.
And still ahead in our newscast, Commission on Poverty discusses subsidies for low-income families. The body of a missing swimmer found off Lantau Beach. And the Olympic torch returns to Earth from space.